when put in the context of when they play the game, how they play the game. I mean, that's not always going to be the same for everyone, but during the pandemic, there were a lot of games that definitely helped. I mean, Among Us blew up over with that, and that I don't think that game had an intended therapeutic intent, but it did. So there are plenty of there are other examples, and for the brevity, I won't go through a lot of them, but I think those are two great examples off the top of my head that were just games that were really, really engaging, and both commercially and I keep even say therapeutic, but it's that wasn't its intention, but that is some of the outcomes that came from it.
Can you repeat which games that were? Because I had a blip.
I said Journey by that game company, and Among Us.
Yeah, I know both of them.
Okay.
Thanks. I want to add Minecraft to the list, just because it's a very established, very hugely commercially successful game that is not originally oriented on like exploring socialities and modes of different ways of being social, like being social in parallel or in solitary mode, or like more like oriented towards different ways, like just also expressing different ways of sociality. And it has been so much, as Kate Ringland and their research showed, actually, like it has been such a huge space for neurodivergent people to play with and to explore, and is being used systematically for that as well. But whenever you do something in Minecraft, you cannot change what is the enjoyment of the game, which is oriented on building and creating. And the sociality was never part, or was not initially, at least, or not deliberately part of that exploring, but it happened to become a fundamental part of like how a lot of people just explore ways that are not necessarily neurotypically oriented on how they might be social among each other, and create community as well.
Yeah, definitely. Can I add a little to that?
Sure.
Yeah, good. Because I think it's, and I don't want to hijack this, but I think it's a really a cool part of what you just said, is that a lot of the sandbox games and these open design games, I think there is a synchronicity there is a between the type of qualitative assessment and interaction you want to have with your end user when you're making a game, to kind of to invite them into this co-design process, and then having the sandbox game where they can express their unique and issues, but their own unique voice. That it gives them a platform for them to express that, and that is sort of what ultimately you want out of the game you're doing in this therapy, is to especially in the neurodivergence, like dealing with neurodivergent people, everybody has their own, like literally everybody has their own interpretations. So you want to allow them to express that, and then these sandbox games and environments are the perfect place to do that, and then build some sort of if you want to co-design an environment and experience that allows them to do that. I think that's ideally where we would want, where that I think is a lot of success could be found there. It also opens up a lot of other legal issues, but that's another subject.
Thank you. So now that we did a bit of a deep dive into specific games and where it's been done well, where it works well. So and also a lot of almost different benefits, like the social part, the expression part, experiencing different versions, different people's versions, maybe also. So where do you see the main benefits, the main potential in using games as a form of like self-therapy, or also intentionally for therapy? Whoever has a thought on this first. I don't mind who of you goes first. I want to hear both of you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think there's, I mean, the obvious answer is, just increasing engagement. I mean, that's what, the games are for. But a little bit deeper than that is that really leaning into the interactivity and the possible and narrative components of games. You can, we can really embrace like thinking about embodied cognition and learning and exploring yourself, through that embodiedness, especially going as VR, AR, XR. That's all as all developing. Those are now new avenues that we can explore and get more embodied motion, embodied learning, embodied cognition into therapy. Then with the narratives, identity development is, gaming is a great way to start dealing with how to, a lot of we don't see, I guess we don't really talk about, or I guess I haven't seen many practices talk about how your identity being a part of your own therapy. And game narratives are a great vehicle for that.
Thank you. Katta, what's your perspective?
I mean, I struggle a bit with the term engagement here, just because. So first of all, the thing is like, as I kind of tried to say earlier, but like, for one, why does it always have to be therapy? Like, can I just play for like, playing sake type of thing? Somewhat personal perspective, but also something that I have seen in other contexts. I do love to quote that paper that I once reviewed. It got accepted, but I don't remember who wrote it anymore. And I don't remember the title either. But there was an amazing situation, and it was that so they did like long-term co-design with kids, but it's not that traditional group who does that. That was my issue. Otherwise I would have found it out already. But like it's like not that long-term group, but like a shorter term. And I know children is a different area, but like there is an analogy to be made here. And they came in and were trying to do long-term like co-design of educational games largely, and their initial step was taking like established games like Tetris or something and putting a little educational layer, for example, for math or whatever on that. And they had the situation where they wanted to introduce their first designs, and kudos to them for putting that in the paper. I love that quote so much. Apparently there was this one kid who was just like seeing what was happening, going cross-eyed and being like, oh, I hate it when they take a perfectly good game and make it educational. Like, I have no idea what the tone was, but that's the tone how I imagine it. And you can totally see that. Like, there is like this there are these very obvious games that tell you that you're not playing them for being games, but you're playing them for like, other things. And what I want to advocate for a little bit is allowing all kinds of people to play without meaning, because that in and of itself can be useful for us as humans, because why would we play otherwise? I know that's a bit philosophical, but if we have kind of like that orientation on enjoyment, engagement, and play for play's sake for the general population, we should also kind of like allow everyone to experience that and not make play something we have to do because of like other goals. I feel like I'm repeating myself on that, but it's an important point. The thing is with engagement, then I find games that are very engaging to be not good for me personally, and like in the ways that I have interacted with others and that I have observed Neurodivergent play. I don't think it's a great strategy necessarily, because what if you do it well with engagement, at least like, and that's like now my personal embodied experience, but like I get drained into that. I have a hyper focus that can go on forever, and that will play your game forever basically, and that is really bad because it leaves me drained, because hyper focus is really, really exhausting. And then maybe I have, I don't know, learned how to or like have engaged with impulse control or breathing techniques or what have you, but also I have been drained in doing so, and I didn't ultimately associate that with a positive experience. So I will be careful just with how we understand engagement in that space and to what end we're using it. And maybe disengagement might be or like, you know, casual engagement at times might be also a design goal, or even like having kind of like different modes, like allowing for both of these ways, but like making it easy to disengage because it's ultimately inconsequential, for example, or even encourage like idle games do that sometimes exceedingly well. But then they're also often, you know, tied into a capitalist system that makes you exploit things anyway. But like there are strategies where we can design for engagements and disengagement at the same time, and allowing people to kind of like flexibly engage with these games, not just on the terms that we kind of prescribe, but also on their own terms, on their current situation, and not trying to always just like tap into one way of engaging with these things.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think when you talk about casual engagement and disengagement, that is definitely a big thing in what we design and what we work on here, is because I think as you say, play is at the heart of everything. I think is at the heart of what we're doing when we want to use games. So that, at least from my personal perspective, like that's you know, always at the top of the list. But you do have, I mean, unfortunately, like, you do have goals that's what you're trying to achieve in this project. If it's to assess something, if it's to study something, if it's to achieve a behavioral outcome or a change, like that's an objective. And to get to that objective, you need the engagement. But then, as you said, it should be, you do have to be very aware of how you're engaging, and that needs to be part of the discussion. So I wholeheartedly agree with that part. Sure.
Okay, thank you. I feel like we've sort of already went into a direction that's also here as a question. A question came up here on our book club. And I feel like, yeah, we've moved a bit in that direction. So I'm going to put it out there now. Is it a false dichotomy between play enjoyment and quote unquote therapeutic effects, given the inherently ableist capitalist worldview we currently live in and the general pressure to be productive?
If I then may, I think when you say that, my initial response to reading this is I think it is false, because I think you can use those capitalist mechanics. I mean, the fact that they work so well doesn't mean it's like it's a tool, and how we use the tool means we can use it for a positive gain and therapeutic benefit. But then when you say the general pressure to be productive is where I turn around and say, well, I don't know if then it comes out, I think then that becomes more specific about what's the goal of the game that you're creating. If the game is just about, as you said, if it's a sandbox game where we just want to explore and play and free, then yeah, we're not to have a pressure to be productive, because that is not the intent. That's not what you want. But if there is a particular goal, behavior goal that you're trying to achieve, where I need this in order to study, if you're using certain CBT techniques, or there's some data that you're trying to gather and you want to use games, this sort of marriage between that science and research and play does require some sort of engagement that has the player being productive. But as you said, the core of that is making sure we do that responsibly. And then I think those mechanics that have worked in this capitalist society, or in commercial gaming, yeah, I'm not taking your money, but we'll like maybe 5 minutes of your time to do this, so that we can observe what happens, we can observe what's going on. I mean, I think then that's how at least I see it, is that I don't think it needs to be this these mechanics are bad and these mechanics are good. I think they're just tools. If I understood your question correctly.
Katta, anything to add to that?
I also struggle a bit with the question, just in terms of in terms of trying to understand what the dichotomy is that the questioner asks, but like just that as a kind of like thing. I do understand that there is an ableist capitalist world we currently live in, and the general pressure to be productive. Yeah? But I do also think that there is kind of like that putting everything under like that therapy has that kind of like therapy often has the undertone in my assessment of like supporting, like making like of the ultimate goal of like making disabled people in like at large kind of like more productive under the terms of an ableist society. Like there is that. To some extent, like following that also increases your chances of survival. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. But the thing is that play and enjoyment are kind of like, you know, they have the subversive potential to let you do things without that necessarily being productive in a way. Like they can be spaces, like you can be super productive in Minecraft and like, you know, effectively that is often seen as like, you know, you're only playing video games and, you know, and you're just only playing video games, whatever. Like it kind of like allows you to create these kind of like pockets of freedom if it's done well, where you don't have to do that. So that's kind of like where I see the difference between the two of them. And then if you merge them, what happens, of course, is that you kind of like, and I know it's kind of like a weird way to talk about it, but I mean that's my way to talk about it. But essentially, what you're doing is you're taking that pocket of freedom and like sucking all the air out of it, and then putting it under that purpose of productivity, and that's just sad.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I hope that addressed the question. I can't see who asked the question, so I'm just gonna hope that it addressed that. At least like I took a lot from it. So we've already went a bit into the direction of talking at least briefly about research. So both of you are also involved in research, at least in parts, or yeah, connected to it. What's your main criticism on how we approach that as researchers right now, like games for therapy, therapeutic elements in games, how we address that, where can we do better in your opinions? Or where do we need to do better? The hard one, right? Or a weird one?
No, not really, but it's gonna surprise you. I mean, I said my fundamental criticism is there, but beyond that, God, can you make them aesthetically more pleasing? Because they're insultingly ugly. I didn't put that in the analysis of the paper previously because like somebody else wanted to do a deep dive, but like, oh God, in research, these games are not designed well. They're disrespectfully ugly. What is that?
I gotta admit,
No, I mean that's spot on. Yes, of course. It's they say chocolate covered food. Like it's bad. Oh, that's funny. Oh, and I give me a second. Oh, yeah, I just wasn't expecting that one. I wasn't expecting. But I was gonna say that one of the things that and like I said, since I'm not a researcher, my background is in design, but I work with professors and researchers all the time, and one thing that we've always seen, and rightfully so, is like they find evidence-based techniques and strategies and approaches, and we try to blend those into, you know, kind of, you know, back and forth into building a game, and that's also visually attractive. But the thing that I think that really, in working with them, that really bugs them, I think that we found a lot in the lab, is Like a lot of these principles, like and therapy, like CBT, rely heavily on quantitative data because it talks about it in a very broad and open view, and it's saying that a lot of what we're trying to achieve, especially in the mental emotional health realm, and then also I think in neurodiversity, it's qualitative, like person to person, like you really getting down there to interviews and understanding why this worked, why this had an effect, and it's not a numbers game, but being able to get to those, and I think to get to those answers and really celebrate and support findings and papers and research that embraces the qualitative data just as much as the numbers. That is important, and we don't do that enough. And I think that's something that needs to be improved.
Thank you. I think that also aligns well. We've had a lot of news today on participatory design, which is a lot of qualitative research we discussed today. I don't think we've seen a lot of numbers today, or I don't think we've seen any numbers today. We haven't seen numbers today. So we're doing good here. Kudos to our presenters today. So yeah, I agree with that. Well, now I lost my train of thought for a second. I'm sorry.
Give me a second. I'm just going to point out that it is ironic that I was usually this very methodological critique person, end up being the design critique person, whereas Ken here as like, you know, the experienced designer instead of being the methodological critique person. It's just perfect.
Well, I intended for this panel to be a bit more like, I don't know, critical against each other. But it's also nice to see that you agree with each other a lot, and like, yeah.
I mean, there is also a thing of like that we need to understand is that none of us want to have the effects that like, so the critique that I presented earlier, I don't think that anyone there had the intention to kind of like solidify the systemic effects that happen when you only design for therapy. And that's what I meant with like every single game. I don't critique necessarily a single game. I critique that there are instances of like a larger set that is like singularly in like that essentially like the where the field ends up solidifying then specific notion of ableism and specific norms that become apparent then. It's not the individual games. That is also why I can like be perfectly nice and pleasant with like individual people, because I do assume that everyone actually doesn't necessarily want to other people or doesn't want to end up, but there are these constraints that act upon us. In research, it's also like that we have to phrase everything as a problem that we address, right? And that I don't know how that happened, but like at some point exploratory, like I was curious about things, type of research got kind of like dismissed, and now we're all like, you know, writing proposals where at the beginning we have to know what comes out in the end. And like all that curiosity that makes knowledge, that's actually fundamental to knowledge construction, kind of sucked out of of just the processes that we work within. And that affects these things, and it creates kind of like more normative tendencies, because what we then promise is kind of like the things that we can expect, and then we have to kind of like do the things we already expected, and it's kind of so. But I don't blame individuals necessarily. I do encourage people to reflect on their role within the systems and all that. But I do think that is also slowly happening. But it needs kind of like my systemic or structural critique that I'm trying to point out. There is kind of an issue here at large for them people to kind of like start realizing how they might contribute to changing that, or how they want to position themselves with them. I also don't have any problem with people doing games for therapy as such. I have a problem with that being the only thing being discussed when it comes to neurodivergence. Not the only thing, but like, you know, the 90% of times we talk about playing games in other contexts, it's about experience and like enjoyment and, you know, all of these things. And then when it comes to disabilities and neurodivergence, it's definitely all therapy and social skills and like diagnosis. And that is kind of like, I just want to look at the rhetorics that are behind that so we can understand what is the difference in how we understand games for some populations versus for others. And then what ends up happening is that people have an opportunity to reflect on that. And that's kind of like where I see my contribution as well, but not to kind of like make individuals feel bad. That's not the point.
Thank you.
If I also, well, this was not a slight separate or different path going down that question, was I would also address, I think project design and management. What I've seen from on the design side, production side, is that many times when getting grant writing, getting money, setting up your proposal, the idea is like, okay, we want to make a game or we want to design a game, and we may ask, and sometimes you'll ask a designer or a consultant to help out and think along with what to do, but there's still not much thought in terms of the production and what it takes to produce. So you'll write out your budgets on, you'll know exactly, oh, we'll need this many participants, we'll need this, we'll have, we want to have this many researchers, and you can have out very much what you need in order to do the research. And then it's like, okay, we got 20,000 left to the game, so that's what we'll do to make the game. But and I think that's where I think a big fault in a lot of the current way the games are being, these design and applied games are being made, is because that there's not any considerable investigation on what it's going to take to build, design, and create what they want. So you end up getting, it looks like I don't know, a lot of the games that are out there that you say that are so trash looking. Yes. And even,
so just FYI, my pronouns are they, them. I just tend to correct people when that happens so that I can reflect on that. It's fine.
But yeah, so that's what I think that's something that we could definitely address and keep going, though, is to think about in the beginning of the project definition phase in your research is really have a proper investigation of what it takes to build and design and budget accordingly, so that you can see, all right, we will need audio, we will need sound, we'll need artists, we'll need designers, and if that may be too much, usually a designer can help scale down the scope to say, okay, well, maybe you wanted your idea, your expectations for a game that you want to build are too big, so let's bring down those expectations to the budget that you can deal with. These are the type of initial steps that I think researchers should start thinking about when they start looking for funds and grant writing, and that can happen at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. While we are sort of on the discussing a bit the negative sides of it, or the negative examples, do you see a lot of potential, or what's your point of view on the potential of actually creating something that might be harmful while the intentions might be good? Like, aside from that, what could be really bad? Like,
I mean, I guess you could unintentionally continue to further stigma and negative stereotypes that, if by not being well informed or ignorant of the context and the user that you're building a game to, that happens a lot. I mean, it's unintentional because you don't know what you don't know. And then that's why it's so important to have that co-design process with your end user, with the people that you're going to be building the game with, so that you can avoid situations like that.
I would say it's not just co-design, as we've also heard earlier. I mean, that can also, like, sometimes you involve people and they have a lot of internalized egoism going on, and like, I mean, everybody does. I do myself, but it ends up being like, co-design is important and is relevant, and like I do not want to discourage you from it, but I want to also ask people to kind of consider activist voices in that space, and especially disability activists, because they usually offer kind of like perspectives on this. So for example, what I find deeply harmful and what I will call out as harmful is if you put in ABA, so applied behavioral analysis methods, in your within a game or within a therapeutic approach, because those are actively harmful, as we've known, as we now know also in academic settings, but we've known that previously in our activist settings. And so that is kind of like where I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not, you know, empirically validated or like fully understood from a scientific level, but usually within activist settings, we kind of can understand the critiques, and if we at least consider them and position ourselves to them, it's better to do that explicitly than just by happenstance ending up being kind of like following one thing that we think is correct, but then ends up being very, very harmful. Again, I don't think that anyone tries to do that deliberately. Like everybody's trying to like help each other here. But sometimes trying to be nice is quite the opposite, has quite the opposite effect. I don't know the saying right now in English.
Thank you. So when we look at where trends are headed within research, within general game development, maybe even like the commercial developments, where do you see it going right now? Where are the trends going? Do you think that's a good direction? Or maybe let's first see where the trends are going from your point of view, where you see us headed with developments, with especially disabled and neurodivergent communities in mind, because that's our focus here. Yeah, where are we headed right now?
Where I really trend predicting that I don't know, like that's a different one to say trend predicting, but I could say where I would like to head and where I would think we could continue to move is you know, and I think, I mean, I've said it enough, and I think, you know, we've heard it all day today, is in that co-design space, but that seems to be growing, and I guess that it would be a trend, if you would want to call that, but and it would be nice to see that continue to develop. But asking questions and getting communities involved and getting more than just, I think keeping games, I think we think about games as a siloed experience, like it's just between the player and the game, and oftentimes that's the case, but I think you end up having more impact on and effect when when there's a social element to those games that involves the community and the people around it and their support system around it. And I think I would like to see the discussion and the development and the research around not just games, but then around more pro-social behavior and thoughts and criticism, so that we can engage active discussions rather than running away from or hiding from it. And I think games can be an easy avenue for that. So I would like to see it go in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. There's more co-design, and there's also more. It seems people are also reflecting more. I like this. Example of. What's her name? I'm not gonna get to it right now. It's about passionate witnessing, the paper that she wrote with Roe Williams. Anyway, where the two of them in that paper explain very, very nicely how one of them came to realize that their research was actively harmful, which was something that they always feared. And I'm putting the link to Website Daisy. Nope, that's a different one. Also an important topic, but not what I wanted to talk about. So there we go. Lou and Boyd realized in meeting Will Williams for the first time, and meeting Will Williams for a paper presentation on a paper where Lou and Boyd was negatively cited in as a negative example, which was something that she always feared would happen at some point, because she kind of like reflected on that. And she's just like, and that paper shows that beautifully, how you can be a good example in acknowledging that, you know, you meant well, but that is not what the effect it had. There were circumstances that made you do that. There's also responsibility for that, but then how do you act going out from that, and how can you kind of like shift focus? And she did very much, and she does now very much co-design and kind of like experience-centered game design with neurodivergent populations. And that's kind of like, I see that also popping up more and more, and I'm looking forward to what's going to come there.
Okay, thank you. Any questions here? No one's raising a hand. I don't have anything on our book clubs, and I think nothing in the chat either. Any last comments you would like to add? Like, I don't know, a call to action or whatnot.
No, actually, my biggest call to action, as I said, is like the thing I would like to see is change more is in the one is to continue in these directions and heading into more co-design space, and then also seeing more research projects initiated with a thorough investigation into design and production and what it, like the cost. So it's not an afterthought of, okay, we've got 20,000, 5,000 left, like we just make a game with that. It's got to stop. It has to stop, or just don't make the game, because it's actively, I think, as you say, well-intentioned. There's an example of good intentions making things worse.
Thank you.
Yeah, to an degree as well. Like, I mean, that to like take it seriously what you design and how you do it, but also to a degree embrace humility a bit more. That's very abstract again, but like I wish that people just on a general level are okay with not having known that well before. It means you develop, and like it means you kind of like are open to learning new things and assessing yourself and being critical and receptive for feedback. And that is something we should all strive for. So I would just appreciate that more in general, to like allow yourself to learn more about things and to do them better that way. Which you generally do, but like in some things we are very defensive, especially when it's kind of like, oh no, I've been a bad person because like I've harmed disabled people. That is like the most cruel thing you can do. Yeah, but like we all do it all the time. Like that shouldn't excuse anything, but that means you need to take responsibility for doing that. That is just a very high level thing, how we might think about these things, and specifically for games. Yeah, don't make them that ugly. Like, and it's really good understanding when not to design a game. Like that is under researched and underappreciated.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, well, thank you. That was very insightful. I agree. I wholeheartedly agree personally, and I'm assuming most of us here agree and had a really good time. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here tonight and have this little discussion. No one else.
Thank you for inviting me, because I've seen these. I've seen the talks you had and like engaged with them like on the side mostly, but I did, and I was a bit like I kind of thought like that it was probably good that I did that critique, but also like that so many people are now taking this so much further and like actively affecting change. And that was super beautiful to see. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be part of that.
Yes. So just another, again, thank you again for inviting me as well. I appreciate having me here. Yeah.